At the outset, I would like to thank the Department of Communication here, Bristol University, for inviting me to share whatever little experiences that I've been gathering from senior professors from all over India, as well as I've been reading something. Of course, Professor Ravindran is here, and he has inspired me a lot, and I follow in his footsteps. And of course, I do know other professors here. Professor Vera has come to visit our department once, and so I don't know all those words that she showered on me. Actually, if I really truly deserve them, that's secondary, anyways. But I am, like you, a young scholar who has embarked on communication research, etc. And I would say that I'm also in my baby steps. So I would like to share whatever little experience that I've been gathering, and I must at this point in time acknowledge the fact that Professor Ravindran has been a very influential person in my career. Of course, there are other professors. Professor Sanjay was my head, so I studied under his guidance. There are a lot of other professors who have contributed to whatever little scholarship that I have gained today. But to a larger extent, because by virtue of the fact that I happen to be Professor Ravindran's first PhD student, and by virtue of the fact that I've been closely following him, so there is a lot that I have inherited from him, perhaps. So maybe I've not actually. I wouldn't say that I will measure up to some of the senior professors here. So they've been in the field, they've been in the academia for a pretty long time now, and so I'm going to share whatever little I know of. And it's true that I am interested in digital media, so I've been working on digital media, both from a political economy perspective. Philosophy is something that has bitten, I've been bitten by the bug of philosophy, and thanks to Professor Ravindran, and culture studies a bit. So today I thought I will discuss spectacle, and I think that is also listed in the lecture schedule. Remaining lectures, I hope I have the flexibility to change the topics. So spectacle is actually a concept which was proposed by Guy Debord. Guy Debord is a French thinker, French writer who belongs to a school called Situationist International. In fact, you will be knowing that there are a lot of thinkers in France who introduced and wrote a lot of seminal works, and also postulated a lot of theoretical concepts to understand media culture, capitalism, etc. So it's post 1960s that we saw the emergence of a lot of these theoretical concepts. So there was a deluge of theoretical innovations that came about post 1960s, probably because there was massive unrest, and following that, I think that perhaps led to the rise of a lot of these theories. And interestingly, there were a lot of keywords which focused exclusively on the modernist capitalist relationships, right? Social reality, social life, and capitalist society, etc. So there were a lot of keywords that emerged, and one of them was Guy Debord. So the first person, and he belongs to this a group called situational interactions. I'm sorry, I'm not getting that. Okay, now what does it do? It actually questioned art, high culture, etc. So which is something what Adorno and Horkheimer also did. So questioning high art as it, so trying to strip art from its elitist status. So that is what they did, and they used Dadaism, a form of art. Surrealism is another form of art, especially during the protest, 1968, French, protest in France. So he participated in this protest, So as part of Dadaism, they wanted to make art something which is commonplace and which is pedestrian and not necessarily something which belongs only to a certain group of people, and it's not something which is very elitist in nature. And thereby graffiti became very popular, and in fact it was during this time that graffiti was quite extensively used to propagate a lot of messages. So protesters, they used graffiti quite extensively during this time. But he has written a few more books, but one of the interesting books that we're going to talk about today is this one, which is called The Society of the Spectacle, Society of the Spectacle. It's a book which he has written by drawing on Marx heavily, of course, no doubt about that. These were people who were heavily influenced by Marx, and especially the concepts of commodity fetishism and alienation. So these are the two concepts which help us to understand what is the Society of the Spectacle. So prior to that, I thought I should first show you these images, but anyway, you have seen the both slides now. So in fact, following Guy Debord, I would also like to touch upon Jean Baudrillard, because Guy Debord's work Society of the Spectacle also triggered, in fact, influenced Baudrillard to talk about images and media logic and media culture in a similar fashion. Of course, both of them contributed to the postmodern understanding of media culture. And then later on, I would also like to touch upon Jody Dean in a very limited way. And Jody Dean is a professor in political science in New York, and she has written wonderful books, and she's still working. She's other two are no more. So one of the books that she has focused on is Communicative Capitalism. She has a lot of other books too. And Jody Dean is a professor who draws quite heavily on Zizek. Zizek is another philosopher, and she borrows a lot of ideas from So I think there is some kind of a connect between these thinkers and the theoretical concepts that each of them proposes. So primarily the first two, if you look at Guy Debord as well as Baudrillard, if you're going to look at both of them and their works, so Baudrillard's work is Simulation and Simulacrum. That's a book that Baudrillard has written, Jean Baudrillard has written. What they focus, what they try to convey is that mediated images which are mediated, control and shape our social life. So that is what they are trying to convey. So images that we get to see. So I think we must understand the fact that we have moved from production-based economy, probably industrial revolution or prior to that, where production-based economy was, the key was the dominant mode of economy. And now we have moved to an economy which is organized around information, communication, and technology. So information and communication has rather become commodities. Unlike commodities which are easy to distinguish in terms of objects and forms of objects, etc. We are today dealing with what is known as information and communication and much of this. So you can apply this to social media in order to understand this. So if you look at these images, it might look like as if I got some half a kilogram of potato and sliced it up and chopped it up and cooked something what we call French fries or some potato fries, right? Why would I use the word French? Probably if you look at a shoe, I think you must have come across a lot of cobblers who can put together a shoe of this kind, right? But the moment when you have these brands, logos inscribed on these products, then what happens? The product as it is lost, you can say. The meaning of the product is lost, but rather it is replaced by the representation. So it is the brand, it's the logo which comes to represent what the product stands for. So eventually, both of them go on to argue that we are in an era where we consume a lot of signs. So we live in consumer culture, and these are only representations. They are not actually products. So this is what I mean. They at the surface level will go a little deeper into each of their works. So very interesting image to see there. Um, this is the image of it's a photograph. It's an actual photograph. Um, and these are spectators watching the first 3D color film. The name of the film is Bona Devil, 1952. So this photograph was taken and it was reproduced by Life magazine. So that's the image that Guy Ritchie has used as his cover page, and his cover page actually conveys a lot of things. One, these are people who are wearing some kind of 3D glass. Hopefully there are one or two women. The photograph is taken such a way, and there are a lot of men seated in rows, in certain uniform rows, and gazing at something. All right. So probably they are watching a spectacle on the screen. So today we are talking about interactive screens, and spectacles are multiplying like anything. You have lots of spectacles all around. Everything is a spectacle. Why does he use the word spectacle? We should find out. Apart from that, interestingly, they are also being watched, and they are also so they are spectators, and they are also spectacled. That is, we are watching them. So they are actually spectacled spectators. So that's the meaning. This cover page says. I think this is a very interesting argument we may have to later on carry forward in order to understand what do we do in social media. Appropriating terms such as producer and consumer. So what are we doing? So that's so here I would like to bring in a Greek mythology. I don't know if you've heard about Ring of Gyges. Ring of Gyges, Gyges. It's a ring which, when you wear, you become invisible, and you can see the entire world. In those days, it said that kings want to wear. They will be invisible, but they won't know what is happening around them. But if you look at social media, or for that matter, media, because Guy Debo did not write this book, Society as a Spectacle, when internet was popular. Internet was just about, becoming a thing to talk about, but then it was not very popular. So he did not write, keeping internet in his mind. He was mostly talking about television, radio, newspapers. These were the two, the traditional media that, he was dealing with when he was writing, this, Society of the Spectacle. So now, if you look at this, Ring of Gyges, I think it works in the opposite way. I think, it is anti-Ring, Gyges, because if you're in social media, I guess you're not invisible. Maybe you're visible. You're visible to everyone, right? So even after you have left your body outside, if you want to talk in terms of embodiment and disembodiment, right? Still, you're visible, you're alive and kicking. Even if you log out of it, right? Even after you log out, you're alive and kicking. So it's something like signature, right? When I put my signature on a paper and it leaves my table, it goes to different places. My body is not going with it, but still it has its meaning, it has its weightage, etc. So something of that kind. So I think here then you are not invisible, you are visible, very much visible, and everyone is, you can see the entire world. I guess like others can also see the entire world, right? When it's online, when it's social media space. Okay. So I think there it's the logic of the anti-Gyges, ring, which works. So that apart, okay. So I just thought like, I should connect the image cover page of that with this Greek mythology. I don't know when, if you're really aware of the fact, or you're really conscious of the fact that you're being watched when you're online, when you're in social media space. The moment you become aware of the fact that you are being watched online, if that consciousness remains, then I guess um, we are more concerned about our self-presentation. So what happens then? We are more concerned about our appearance. So primarily the chief theme of this book is how our social life is getting degraded. So he's saying that we shift from being to having to appearance. So now what's happening then? Being is about lived experience, what I am, who am I, etc. Probably in the real physical world, etc. That is given a go by. So we're not very much worried or concerned about the being. So what about having, owning something? Okay, you see a lot of these products, it's about owning, or when it comes to social media, it's more about appearance. So he's saying that appearance is more important, and that's why all these traditional media, for that matter even social media, later on we'll come to that, they are producing spectacles. Appearances are more important, in order to allure you into buying things, or making you desire to buy a product, etc. So they are creating the spectacles. So advertisement is a spectacle, or film can also be called a spectacle, right? I don't know, maybe a cover page of a magazine could always be a spectacle, because people look at the cover page and they have to buy magazines, right? So kind of spectacle can be created. So what Boudria then, he's saying that it's nothing but he's trying to link spectacle and the economy. It's kind of a there is a political economy perspective also. He says, I don't want to use the term media or mass media. Media is just a technology, and it is a media is a kind of an instrument. That's it. It's just an instrument. It's a tool, which carries out some technical functions, and then something can be seen, etc. So I don't want to use media or mass media, but rather he wants to use the term spectacle, because spectacle is a capitalism's it's capitalism's instrument. He says that it's the instrument which capitalism uses, right? So through spectacle, then images are created. So all these traditional media, they are filled with imageries, they're filled with images. So, and how these images are mediated. So that is the argument that he would like to put forth. I think everywhere. So I open my mobile phone, even as I'm reading something, then messages can pop up, or if you're using app, some advertisements can pop up, right? So I think these are all, there are a lot of such spectacles, right? Even for that matter, if you're reading a particular news in Scoop Hoop, it could be like 10 things to do, whatever. So that's considered to be a spectacle, right? Which is not about then reality. So that's the argument. Okay, so these are all kind of hyper real, which I will come to it when we discuss Jean Boudria also. So actually, Debo has written this work, and he has a great contempt for consumer culture. He's saying that what's happening, when a lot of these images are thrown at you, we become passive consumers, and we take them in, right? We are very passive consumers. But of course, that logic does not work when it comes to social media, because social media operates on a different logic, and you're not necessarily passive consumers. You may be an active consumer, but still you may be contributing to the capitalist logic, right? You may be doing something in Facebook, but still that eventually helps only Facebook and Twitter in terms of helping these companies to make a lot of money, right? So there are different ways by which they do it. So I think in today's context, we must talk about how even platforms and algorithms and codes, everything is actually, they're also becoming kind of spectacles, invisible spectacles. They can do something in order to help these companies. So I said, like, this work is based on commodity fetishism and alienation, right? So I don't know, I mean, how many of you have read commodity fetishism, which is a Marxian concept of other matter alienation. So what happens then when these images are thrown at you? These images, they mediate our experience. So I want to have I want to download an app which can tell me how many calories I'm shedding, etc. So they kind of shape and mediate our experience. So I cannot go for a walk if the app is not working. Or as one of my scholars, he uses this app, and suddenly his wife took away the phone because she wanted to make a call to someone, and then he stopped walking. Right? He couldn't move further. Right? It's not I'm not blowing it out of proportions, but there's some way in which some of our experiences are shaped by so here it's not just images, it's also these apps and platforms and codes, everything. So they are also becoming now spectacle. So even he went to the extent of using his wife's phone and walked 50 steps and said that I have walked 50 steps for you, but he actually walked 50 steps for the data. So doing it for the data. So these are all some ways in which I think similarly images, like all advertisements, basically, like he was talking about advertisements and how they concoct needs and realities, and as a result how they influence our beliefs, right? So look at if you're talking about this wellness watch, I've seen people like who are very critical of these technologies, but all of a sudden they wear Apple Watch and then start talking about, see, I've watched these many steps, and the idea of being fit and everything has completely changed. So advertising, he says, manufactures new desires and new aspirations. Right? So any image for that matter. Okay? Now that goes with even images that you upload in Instagram, etc. So why does he say that there is a shift from being to having to appearance, right? So he says that so this is something which is very important. The whole life of those societies in which modern conditions prevail presents itself as an immense accumulation of spectacles. I think spectacles and signs are quite plenty anywhere you go. I'm staying in the guest house, so there is Bisleri, there is Blue Star, there is what else? Some biscuits. There are a lot of these spectacles. These are all spectacles. Or you are at the airport, you have a lot of spectacles to look around and look at. You are at a mall, you have a lot of spectacles there, right? And mobile phones and television. So we have an immense accumulation of spectacles, which is spectacle. I think he's using the word to refer to images, right? But he doesn't want to use the word image, because when you say spectacle, he's also talking about how capitalism is going to exploit us, or is exploiting us. So that is why he uses the word term spectacle. So it is inherent. Spectacle has that meaning within itself. All that once directly lived. So in the case of like walking, probably he walked, with this his own self-consciousness. Now he has to depend on technology consciousness, right? So that's a term again one of the famous cultural geographer uses. His name is Nigel Thrift. Nigel Thrift. So he says it's about technological consciousness, right? So it's something like some time ago, about 15, so people who are about 45, 50 years, I've seen a lot of these journalists, they have a very good understanding of political history, be it in India or political history of India, or at the state level, because they've been reading a lot and they have read a lot. On the other hand, I don't know about the upcoming journalists wannabes, and so they want to depend more on Google. So the same political history can be obtained from Google, if you search it. So what is my consciousness about the political history of India is also coming from technology. So there's a technology consciousness as well. So it's very difficult actually to separate human beings and technology. Okay, leave that apart. So all that once directly lived has become representation, right? So everything is represented through images. So I don't live anything, directly. So if you take the case of social media, it's all about, representation. For that matter, we don't have something called physical bodies. We just rely too much on data bodies that exist in online, spaces, and so these are all, only representations. So you can watch a Hindi film, but that's not a lived experience. So I don't know if a certain community is portrayed in this film. I probably will understand as it is represented in the film, rather than lived experience. So I don't go to the place where they live, and I don't interact with them, and I don't, experience their suffering or plight, but rather I get to understand, their them through the images of, through the images represented. So through these mediated, images. So that's what he's saying. That, this being has actually shifted to having and this appearance where images actually dominate. So I think in today's context, if you talk about technology, I'll just read this out. What do you do when you get lost in a foreign city? Do you ask a passerby for directions, or consult Google Maps on your smartphones? Perhaps Siri can help. Such technology is incredibly useful, but it also engineers our behavior, right? So that's what I said about, wellness technologies. If Debo were alive today, he would almost certainly extend his analysis of the spectacle to the internet. But people have started. That's what we're going to discuss. How can we use this concept of spectacle to understand, internet? So he would have been horrified by social media companies such as Facebook and Twitter, which monetize our friendships. Okay, so they monetize our friendships. On the one hand, there is something called sociability, but on the other hand, there is something called exploitation, which monetize our opinions, which monetize our emotions. Our internal thoughts and experiences are now commodifiable assets. So this is again, drawing on commodity fetishism of Marx, where everything has a certain exchange value, right? Use value apart, there's something called exchange value. Like, okay, so I have a watch and it has a certain exchange value. It has to be manufactured to be sold in the market so that it produces exchange value. So is the case with every information that we post in social media, or every image for that matter. There is a certain exchange value. So advertisement also has an exchange value, which triggers you to desire to buy the product and thereby, right? So we now seem to be asking questions like, did you tweet today? We haven't. Why haven't you posted a picture on Instagram to Instagram? Did you like your friends' photos on Facebook yet? So I think, which tells a lot about appearance. So that's what he's saying. It's not about being, it's more about appearance. So we want to rely more on images and stuff like that. I think it's a slightly. So alienation, I think, I don't know if I have to touch upon that. So Marx talks about alienation when he's talking about commodity fetishism also, how the labor is removed from the product. Okay, so there is an alienation. How the labor is, the person who is producing the manufacturing the goods is also removed from the process of labor itself. So he doesn't have control. He doesn't have any right over the commodity. He doesn't have any right to produce goods at his own will or at her own will. No, he can't do that. Okay, so he actually talks about alienation from different perspectives, and I think this applies to social media also. So a lot of times we say that I'm a producer, like I post whatever I want to, but then do you have right over the content and comment that you have posted, right? So we do not have right over the content that we post. We don't have control over the means of production, how something is produced. We don't know how the logic works. And when it comes to the internet, especially social media, okay, on the one hand, if you look at television, radio, newspapers, we are very passive. On the other hand, we say that we are very active. But there, you actually do not know. So let alone the fact that you don't have control over the way in which this is going to be produced, circulated, etc. But you don't know how these algorithms work. So you are completely, like, it's very kind of black boxed. It's very opaque, right? It's not very transparent. It's very opaque, and you don't know what is happening. All you know is that you post a comment, and after that, what happens? You don't know, right? So that's the way it is. Okay, so that's how capitalism and its logic works. So that's something which we need to understand, especially when you're talking about alienation. I think we are alienated from everything. Now there are two arguments. So when I end, I think I'm going to end with what do you call the both sides of the argument, right? So whether it is possible to see social media as a space which facilitates activists and people like us to articulate our voice, or is it like exploitation? So there is literature that is on the both sides. So if you're looking at from the spectacles perspective, I think many people have started arguing that it's only helping in creating a spectacle, right? It's representation. Everything is something like representation. It's just imagery. So you don't know how you are actually sucked into this circuit of capitalism. This is what it says. So how these spectacles work? I think even Arjun Appadurai talks about spaces, and he makes a very interesting point when he says, you see this even before apartments come up, you see billboards or you see advertisements for these apartments. Now apartments are yet to come. What you see in the billboard is only a representation. It's not about being, it doesn't exist. It's not about even having, no, you're not owning it as it. It's about appearance, it's about an image. He doesn't talk it necessarily from the spectacle point of view, but he says, you invest in dreams much before they come into being, right? So you see billboards and all of this, okay? It's a look at a different issue. Like a lot of times, we come across this Hindu, first page of the newspaper. There will be a news report which is about, a building or an apartment has collapsed. But that's the first page. But the actual first page is like some real estate advertisement. We come across a lot of these logical inconsistencies, right? You understand what I'm saying, right? But then there is something which dominates. I don't think the news of the apartment collapsing is not something which is dominant. So here, what is dominant majorly is the image of that real estate. So I think it's quite commonplace. If you are in Tamil Nadu, some of you must would say for that. It's quite common to come across a lot of these advertisements. It's very interesting. Real estate, which is about apartment built on some physical sites, or it's about some information communication technologies. That's like Amazon and stuff like that. It's two contradictory sites basically. One is physical. I mean, you can hear think in terms of the materiality of these things, right? So so he says we invest in dreams much before they come into being, and that's a very interesting argument. So a lot of times people ask me, like, do you own a house as yet, right? I don't know, it's quite a common rhetoric among teachers also. So if you have spent 5 to 7 years working in a university, so the first question that comes up is, do you own a flat, do you own a house? Right? Even strangers, I have run into strangers in sense like, while attending such workshops, and you come across academicians from other universities, and the first question that comes up is, do you own a house? So our social life has been, you want to say distorted? I think it's distorted, but has been shaped, and you have to thank images, mediated images. So mediated images are actually causing us to think, along these lines, right? Which is only fueling capitalism's logic. Which is only eventually fueling capitalism's logic. So allowing capitalism to get further stronger and stronger and stronger. So that's the argument, that Guy Debo is making. When saying that, um, so we are always, you know, so I think on Instagram we want to post pictures. Uh, it's like yeah, you drink coffee, you post that image, and it's the representation which actually becomes more real. It's a representation. You're taking an image photograph of what you're doing, and that is circulated, and that becomes the dominant image circulating through the networks, and these days, if you look at technologies are designed in such a way that they amplify spectacle. They've been designed in such a way. You look at phones. So last week my friend, my colleague purchased a mobile phone and said that it's 37,000. I'm just wondering, okay, what is this 37,000? Right? So I don't want to buy a mobile phone that costs 37,000, but he has I wouldn't call it technology fetishism. Let's see, what is that? He's obsessed with technology. He likes to spend a lot of money on technologies. So, and then he took a photograph, and the photograph quality was, good. Now, I think there are a lot of features and affordances, in all these apps and technologies, which will further this qualities of spectacle, right? So you always have to be, so you take a picture, the quality is good. Otherwise, you can use filters, you can do it, or you can use, some editing tools, you can do something, right? But that's all, creating a spectacle is, what Guy Debo says. Let's take some time. So I'll just read this. We no longer live, we only aspire. We work to get richer. Paradoxically, we find ourselves working in order to have a vacation. We can't seem to actually live without working. Capitalism has thus completely occupied social life. So our lives are now organized and dominated by the needs of the ruling economy. So one of my friends said that one of my bucket list wish got fulfilled, she said. What is that? I went to Las Vegas in the US, she said. Okay, so that's I mean, I don't know where she get the idea from. So there is a lot of movies, perhaps, streaming this spectacle, and so it becomes something that one has to achieve. So you work towards that, right? So that's what this. We work to get richer. We find ourselves working in order to have a vacation. We can't seem to actually live without working. Capitalism has thus completely occupied social life. So that's what he wants to say. Now, fine. So people might say that he's kind of media phobic, right? So he doesn't like media. He says that media would always stream continuously a lot of images, and if these images are to be believed, then that is what we do. So he appears to be media phobic, right? But he also goes on to then give us another concept called detonement. Just write it down, where he says you can subvert spectacle. can subvert spectacle, right? If you engage in a process called dethronement. So now that is where I think we are going to actually look at how whether it's possible to what is this, see the 2.0 spectacle as something which facilitates people to challenge spectacle, right? So what we are saying is Facebook